Welcome back to another episode of the award-winning Bytes and Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Kristin and and today we're talking about something we all can secretly agree on. Cybersecurity shouldn't suck. Joining me today is Tom Sego, a cybersecurity leader with a wildly diverse background. He's done everything from chemical engineering to working at Apple to a professional poker player to wine importing. And now he's tackling the challenge of making security work for critical infrastructure. In this episode, we will be covering why security is harder than it needs to be and what's making it so frustrating, how trust and usability are just as important as firewalls and risk reports, and why the best security is the kind that people actually want to use. Oh, and if you love food stories, stick around because Tom has some incredible ones. From hunting down pastries in France to unexpected wine discoveries. Let's get into it. Well, as always, we're going to start with the traditional questions of favorite food and favorite food memory. Go ahead, Tom, and then we'll do the introductions after.
Okay, well, my favorite food, it depends on the week sometimes. I think this last week, my favorite food was a Dungeness crab sandwich on a brioche bun from Gott's, which was sexual. I mean, it was so amazing. Yeah, we're coming out hot. And then I think the other one that's very salient, maybe 2 months ago, I got this recipe from one of my colleagues at BlastWave, and we have this food channel. And so we share pictures of food and we share recipes with each other. And it's the number one channel on our work site, believe it or not.
What is it, like a Slack channel?
It's a Slack channel, yeah. And so we one of my colleagues shared this recipe for a mushroom Wellington with goat cheese. And it was just incredible. It was incredible. And I made it for my wife and a friend of ours, again, first time. And it was amazing. It was just so rich.
So you have two current food fixations, which is epic. That's great.
Yeah.
And favorite food memory.
Okay. So these are going to be two stories. So the first story was me when I was 13 years old, traveling for the first time out of the country to France. And my dad took me and two of my brothers, and we essentially bought bicycles in Luxembourg. We flew to Luxembourg, bought bicycles, and we had backpacks. And so we biked around France for 6 weeks. And very early on, maybe a week in, I discovered French pastry, and specifically the Napoleon. And I remember seeing this incredible pastry in the case and thinking, how do I get my hands on some of those things? And it's because we were camping at night at all these campsites. They drank beer and wine and stuff. And so they had all these bottles. And so I was collecting bottles, returning bottles for 25 centimes, which I think it was like 4 francs to $1 back then. This is before the euro. And so I was collecting bottles, turning them in. And I'll still remember collecting enough bottles to turn into French francs, to turn it into Napoleons. And the Napoleon was just incredible. And I still remember that store that I bought the first Napoleon, and the entire trip, that's all I did. It was
entrepreneur spirit early on.
Fuel. Yes,
that's
exactly.
Amazing. Oh, that's funny. That's awesome.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the fact it was entrepreneurial. I just thought, I want this pastry. I'm going to get it. So I was very food oriented, food motivated. The second one was also a trip, believe it or not. My girlfriend at the time and I were in Turkey in 2003. And we had, I think this is after I proposed to her, by the way, on this trip. And so we were outside of a town called Ephesus, and there was a small village about 3 miles away that was kind of done for day trips. And so you'd have these buses take people from Ephesus and they'd go to Syringe, I think that's the name of the place. And my girlfriend, fiance now, had booked a place for us to stay in this small village. And so we, take one of the buses in. It's about 4 o'clock and we arrive and it's just teeming with life. There's all kinds of markets going on and everything. And at about 5 o'clock, we're settling into our hotel, which overlooks this village. And all of a sudden we see everybody leave. This was for day trips. So all the buses left and we're essentially left with the locals.
Awesome.
And I have my first experience of Rocky at the time. And then we're looking for a place to eat dinner and everything's closed. And there was a very highly rated place called Aunt Pervin's that we found on the map, but it looked like it was closed. We knocked on the door. It turned out to be her living room. And she goes, yes, we're open. We're open. And so she almost like, the best Marigold hotel or something. She runs to the back deck, flips on all these fairy lights, and then sits us down at this table, hands us 2 menus. We're by ourselves. She just turned it on. And I end up ordering a dish called Monty, which is it's a lamb dumpling with yogurt and chili sauce. And that was just an incredible experience. It was amazing. It's delicious. It's so good.
That's amazing. That's probably one of the best stories I've heard. No offense to all the guests who've come
I've got more where that came from.
I'm sure you do, Tom. I'm sure you do. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then I will explain to listeners how we met, because it does involve food.
So I am the co-founder and CEO of BlastWave, which is a cybersecurity company that protects critical infrastructure, the types of industrial control systems that make real things and protect us, create drinking water. They process sewage, they create power, energy, etc. So our mission is to protect those kinds of systems which they're under assault today. But my background is I was a chemical engineer. I grew up in the Midwest, and I started my career at Caterpillar, and I did sound suppression engineering there. Then I moved on to spend 8 years at Eli Lilly, where I got exposed to this 3-letter agency called the FDA. And I got exposed to all of the regulations related to the FDA through a pharmaceutical manufacturing lens, and just came to love manufacturing. I took a trip to Archer Daniels Midland to see how these rail cars full of corn from nearby farms were converted to syrup and other kinds of products. And that was a life-changing experience. Just that 1-day tour of Archer Daniels Midland in Decatur, Illinois was just incredible to see how the hard work that farmers kind of pour into their job to feed us, and then looking at the supply chain and how that gets processed and turned into goods that eventually end up on grocery shelves. That's just almost a magical process to me.
It is.
So I spent 8 years at Eli Lilly, and then I went to business school, decided I wanted to try to have a bigger impact. And then I went to Alta Vista, and I went to Emerson Electric, and I did process control. It was like Emerson had a division called Fisher Rosemount, which did process controls for food and beverage and pharmaceutical and other kinds of plants. I did corporate strategy and business development there. And then I went to Alta Vista, did product management. Then I spent 10 years at Apple, and I ended up running worldwide sales support there. And that was a very transformational experience. And it's really colored the way I view cybersecurity today. I feel it's too complex, and the best thing that we can do is to make it simple.
Great.
If we can make it simple and secure, that's what people need. They don't need secure and a headache. They need simple and secure. So I'm not going to digress there, and then I started my entrepreneurial career once I realized that the pace at which I wanted to operate, the things I wanted to get done, I felt constrained inside Apple. And Apple's a great company. I love Apple. Great people, great products. But I knew I needed to do my own thing and ventured out, partnered with somebody who knew what they were doing, kind of the adult supervision, who had been an entrepreneur for 15 years, learned the ropes somewhat through that process. And that was a mobile telephony company, which is still around today. We did an acquisition, which was fun. Then I started my own solar storage company to store solar energy, because I felt like that was a big missing link to allowing us to generate more energy domestically, and also to help reduce greenhouse gases. And then the price of natural gas cratered, which made that business very difficult. Then I started a wine importing business, which was fun, educational, but extremely challenging. The wine industry is very competitive. Yep. The margins are small. And then I was reading Wired magazine and reading about Kim Zetter's article around the electric grid hack of Ukraine. And this was in 2015. And it was like a lightning bolt hit my head. It was kind of coalescing that all that manufacturing experience I'd had, where I saw what industrial control systems looked like, I saw how vulnerable they were, and I realized that I need to dedicate the rest of my life to solving this problem, because it's just that important. I did leave out the part where I played professional poker for 3 years, which was
at this point,
fun.
at this point, I was expecting you to say something like, yes, and I followed in Jacques Cousteau's shadow and I was discovering new features of the ocean. Because like you basically said everything that would lead up to that. Yes, the OTICS sector, because it is a noble cause and it is important and critical, to use the same term we always do, in terms of fulfillment in general than just being in cyber. And again, I love our cyber people around us, but it's a different vibe when it's not just about data, it's about safeguarding lives, right? It just changes how you view what you do.
Yeah. And I feel that there may be other industries like this, but it's one of the few industries where I feel like we are all on one team as defenders. There's a community of people who I even created what's called the OT Zero Trust Alliance to help facilitate more sharing, more thought leadership collectively that helps benefit our customers as opposed to helps us individually as vendors, because that community aspect is something that I just feel deeply to my core. Yeah, I definitely agree with the community aspect. I think it's the best community in cybersecurity, and I am biased and I don't care. I'll say it. So, and I do think there's plenty of complementary type industries that fit this. So like food safety, food defense, very much same. Yeah. I come from a long line of firefighters, same. Any type of civil service, generally speaking, fits into this, especially in the life-saving aspect, whether it's a paramedic or it's a firefighter, or it's a police officer, any of that kind of vibe. I think they understand that it's not just about certain things, it's about life. So yeah, definitely resonate with all that you just said, Tom. And then we met at a conference this past year of 2024. And we actually met while we were holding our lunch plates, ironically. And you started talking to me about wine, and we completely nerded out about wine for, 30 minutes or something like that. And I adored it. I love talking about wine because it's such a really interesting field to go into, first of all. And also it's so telling what a glass of wine or a bottle of wine has. It's, the soil, the climate, the people. And that's why I like, it's not just to drink or enhance your food. It's about the story of the bottle for me. And it's the story of the culture. It's the story of in some cases, it's many cases multi-generational. It's about the land. It's about the sweat. Yes. Well, not in the bottle, but yes. No, yeah. Hopefully not. No. But I also love it too, because some of these particular grapevines have been around for decades. They are very resilient little plants, but also very temperamental and don't like certain things. And I love that you could have wine in one region and it's entirely different in another, and it's the same variety of grape. Yeah. And we also discussed about how we're not into necessarily the brand names of wine. So when people ask us what our favorite wine is, I answer with my favorite grape. I don't answer with my favorite wine, maybe varietal if I'm feeling a little salty that day. But also we discussed house champagne versus grower champagne. I like grower champagne. House is great though. I would totally go for house. I mean, nobody's going to stop me from that bottle of Dom Perignon, but I do like grower better. I just like the idea that it came from them and it didn't just get put into a larger house that we all know. If anybody wants more information about wine, just, hit us both up. We'll start being completely nerdy about that some other time. If you found our episode on agri-terrorism featuring the Animal Agricultural Alliance insightful, here's another opportunity to explore more important conversations about our food system. And if you haven't already listened to that episode yet, I would highly recommend it. Speaking of important conversations, inspiration comes in countless forms. It's a thought, a conversation, a connection, a chain reaction. We never know exactly how inspiration will hit, but we do know this. When ideas and perspectives are shared across the table, they don't just add, they multiply. At the Animal Ag Alliance 2025 Stakeholder Summit, happening April 30th through May 2nd in Arlington, Virginia, hundreds of food chain partners will come together, tackle one of the biggest topics in the industry, sustainability. This year's theme, Food for Thought, Dishing on Sustainability. It's all about bringing together a diverse group of decision makers, from farms and ranches to restaurants and retailers, to discuss the future of how we raise and distribute animal protein. With a dash of innovation and a heaping serving of collaboration, the summit is where meaningful conversations happen, shaping the future of our food system for generations to come. Register by April 25th to reserve your seat at the table. For more details, visit animalagalliance.org or check out the link in the show notes. But let's talk a little bit about BlastWave.
Because if you look at your career in terms of your trajectory and how you got there, but what made you start actual BlastWave other than this article that you read and it was this, really profound moment for you? I'm really interested because founding an industrial controls security company, speaking from experience, is kind of wild. And I would love to hear your journey on that.
Well, I think it's emblematic of aspect of my personality, which is I just have a tremendous amount of curiosity and I just go down rat holes. And when I go down these rat holes, I'll spend 3 months, 6 months, sometimes longer, and research things to the point where I'm trying to figure out why can't this be solved? Or what is the real essence of the problem here? And I think in the case of cybersecurity, it was after I'd played poker professionally. And so this idea of an adversary was very interesting relative to most industries. Most industries, you have vendors who are competing with one another on either price, quality, or service, or some form of fashion, but they don't have an adversary. They don't have a third party that's trying to beat all of them and punish their customers. And that presence of an adversary who's smart, has very sophisticated tools, who increasingly is using AI more effectively offensively than what the defenders can use AI for. So that aspect of the adversary, I think, makes it somewhat unique to other industries. And it presents a level of challenge. And so anyway, as I was down this rat hole, I just started to get this thesis that the problem with cybersecurity is not the technology. The problem with cybersecurity is the human.
Yes.
And if we approach this from a human-centric view, looking at first principles and figuring out when you go and catalog 100 accidents that occur, incidents that occur in OT, invariably, almost all of them are the result of some human action or human inaction. It's either someone clicking on a link in a phishing email, or it's someone sharing usernames and passwords on a sticky note on an HMI in a control room, or it's a misconfigured firewall, or it was configured correctly by the IT group, and then conditions on the ground changed, and those firewall rules created conflict. And then that led to people to then lower their defenses because the people couldn't get their work done. And that led to problems. So it was this realization that you've got the human adversary and you have the user who oftentimes, when they face friction, they're looking for workarounds.
Yep.
And so I thought, man, I spent the first decade of my career learning about how to make stuff in factories. And then the second part of my career was at Apple, trying to make things simple and boil down complexity. I just felt like I'm at this nexus of these two. And I had the privilege of spending a lot of time with the operators, the superintendents, the engineers, the people who do this kind of hard work. And I just felt like I was in a place where I could actually make a difference.
Love that. The human-centric is also another reason why you and I vibe really well, because I'm the same mentality. Technology doesn't screw up, we screw up. So yeah, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And I think this is why I really love working with the food defense teams. And I know you're going to resonate with this. It's because they're looking at that same aspect, but just on the food part. And I love how now they see cybersecurity as a partner in that journey, because everything is digital. The equipment that makes the food, the equipment that brings the food in and out, the equipment that picks and harvests the food, everything, it comes back down to technology. And I think a lot of people are really hung up on AI, which is fine, rightfully so. That's, it's the new shiny, if you will, in some ways, but it's not really that new. It's just a new way of branding it, if you will. And I think we play so much defense in security. There's not a lot of offense, and there's our adversary. They're always 10 steps ahead of us a lot of times, and we're playing catch up just to make sure they don't get in the door. That when these human-centric type behaviors cause a problem in OT and ICS, it's really detrimental, because it's just one more thing that we have to deal with. And this is why I say a lot of times that cybersecurity is really about social engineering and mitigating shame. We're just dealing with humans. We're doing, that are trying to just do their job and go home to their families. And the idea for OT and ICS is to make sure they get home. We want them to get home. I don't want to.
Absolutely.
I am terrified of the day, and it's going to happen, when a CISO has to admit that a cybersecurity incident caused a food issue, a food recall of food. born illness and people couldn't go home that day. That is going to be the worst moment for a CISO, because right now they're very focused on data, and that's fine. Rightfully so. I get that, right? There's a whole lot of regulations. There's a whole lot of things. If you add privacy into the mix, there's a whole other side to that. But the fact that a CISO will have to stand up and say someday, this was because of a cyber attack, OT or an IT or whatever it was, that's going to be a really sad day for our industry. And I would like to be on the side of proactive right and keep pushing that we have to keep doing the right things. And we're still figuring out as we go, right? I mean, Tom, this is still like the plane being built while we're in the air kind of vibes at times.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I was also thinking, you bring up safety. One thing I left out of my bio is that I became a certified safety professional when I was at Eli Lilly, and I ran safety programs. And this ties back to cybersecurity, because my thinking back then was looking at the human, both the human behaviors, but more importantly, what were the antecedents, the things that human beings would think about that would lead to an unsafe or at-risk behavior? And could we design out those risks? And so that proactive approach of trying to design out risks, eliminate entire categories of risks if possible, is exactly the fundamental first principle that we put in place at BlastWave, which is, can we engineer out the risk of, let's say, social engineering and phishing? Because again, I don't want to talk too much about our product, but we eliminate phishing as a risk category because there are no usernames and passwords. And we fundamentally try to make this as easy as Apple Pay. So the idea was just to make it, again, simple and secure.
Yeah, it's such a hard thing because we don't have the attention spans that we used to. People aren't willing to sit there and figure it out. I know Apple Pay is amazing, and I feel like the US still hasn't completely grabbed onto it. If you go to Europe, everything's touchless for the most part, except for like those small little villages where you have to have cash. And I love it. And actually, we were just talking about this after a trip to the UK recently, that I didn't take my card out once. I just paid on Apple Pay the entire time I was there. And I feel like adoption is slow, especially in food and ag, because trust is a real big problem.
Yeah.
You have to earn your right into these places. It's same with some of the utilities as well, right? Rightfully so. I always say that, food and ag and water are the kids' table. We have to fight for our right to get to the big table, even though
So why do you think, I know you're the interviewer, but why do you think that trust has been either slow to build with the security community and the food industry? What's getting in the way of that?
I think it's lack of knowledge about the industry. I think that's one of the big things. If you don't talk the talk or walk the walk properly, I'll give you a good example. The same conference that we were at, I happened to sit at one of the tables that was denoted food production table. And of course, nobody sitting there was from food except for a couple of gentlemen that were from a well-known company. I'm not going to say the company, but you've probably eaten the food. And I purposely sat next to them because they had their little t-shirts on. They were branded, so it was very obvious who they were. And I said, "Hey, how you doing? Tell me about what your production is like." I really was interested because I'm just like you, Tom, super curious, and I'm going to ask crazy questions. So we got chatting and had this really great conversation. And so the rest of the table sort of had this educational moment. You could watch the light bulbs clicking on. Oh, I didn't think about that. Okay. And at the end of it, the gentleman stood up and said, "I have never sat at an OT or ICS conference and had a conversation with anybody who understood food production. Thank you very much, because I now feel like I'm not alone." And I thought to myself, that's what it's like being in the food and agricultural industry, because you feel like you are on an island. It's manufacturing. You can 100% show up to a manufacturing conference and dominate the conversation. But because it's food, which again goes back to food safety, regulations, heavy forecasting on budget, you're running everything on bubblegum and shoestring, it feels like.
Low margins.
Everybody's got 3 or 4 hats on. I didn't even know I was doing OT back in the day when I was doing IT at a bakery company. It wasn't until I realized that I was doing it, because I had a conversation with an OT engineer, that I realized, oh, I'm doing that. But I never really saw the difference or the vibe or that convergence crap. I was already doing it,
Yeah.
And I think if you come in with the attitude of, I understand what you're going through and all the pressure you're under and all of the different nuances that come with food, have people get into the door a little bit better. But the trust factor. Hey, listeners. I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you. Because of you, the Bites and Bites podcast, which is also an award winner, has officially passed 8,000 downloads.
Wow.
I am beyond grateful for this incredible listening community. Your support, your shares, and your feedback keep this podcast growing. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor though. Like, comment, and share. The more people we reach, the more we can raise awareness about the real cybersecurity challenges and critical infrastructure. Now, let's jump back into the episode. So let's take it like one step. We'll just take it all the way back. We'll make it simple as you've been trying to do with everything. You're a farmer, multi-generation. You're probably like the 6th generation. Let's say your primary crop is soy, because God knows everything is made with soy. And you have a new regulation where there's a traceability rule that just came out. We need to know what seed came from what plant. How are you going to do that? Most likely with technology. Who pays for that tech? You do. As the farmer, you're paying for that tech. You might get a grant, you might get some supplemental tax relief or something like that, but most likely you're paying for it. How are you going to pay for it when your entire harvest covers your entire life every year? Multiple harvests, probably. You're going to mortgage your house. So you put your house and your family on the line every time. And the funny thing is nobody gets that. Nobody understands that except for those of us that do. If you were going to let people into your life, that trust factor has to be so high because you're basically putting your life into their hands, if you will, which puts an entirely different mindset on the situation. So this is why I always say, do you actually need that tech? Is it necessary? Are you required? Okay.
That's a really good point. The risk is so high in this area of their life, they can't take on even a small amount of incremental risk.
Correct. And then if you add cybersecurity on that layer, because now you have new tech that's been introduced, and God knows you're not going to put any cybersecurity necessarily around it because that's just another thing, right? And you and I know, Tom, that products are not made with security in mind because they're not regulated to be having security in mind. That adds a whole other layer. And then if you add nefariously bad actors, whether it's just bad actors, nation state, extreme hacktivists, agroterrorism, all the whole thing on the top of that, now you've got a whole other risk factor that they don't have the experience or the time to deal with. They're probably completely freaked out about it. They might be being terrorized for various things. Their farm has been exploited for whatever particular reason, and they can't get their crop to move off or on the farm. And all these things come into play. If I was a farmer,
all because of that traceability connection that was not their choice, that was imposed upon them by the government. Now they're facing those extra consequences as a result of that. You got to feel for it.
It's so frustrating to me that at the end of the day, it usually ends up being the farmer that's the one that has paying the price. It's not the consumer. It's not the manufacturer of food. It ends up being the farmer, the base starting point, right? That's wrong to me. That's wrong. But we could have a whole other discussion about that at some other time. And I'm sure I will be happy.
By the way, I'm working actively with a company that is trying to reduce the cost of various aspects of farming to enable traceability.
Yes, that's what we should be doing.
They've told me they need us on 100% of their work streams to protect them from cyber threats. So in that way, the farmer then is going to save money because they're going to use fewer pesticides, less water, and so forth because of their technology. And then they get the traceability and security for free, essentially.
Yeah, and especially since there's all these sustainability requirements that are happening, right? The UK is a great example. The farmers have to live up to this sustainability aspect, which is going to be done with precision farming. But the adoption of technology hits that trust button again. Because why am I going to bring this new equipment in? And what we're doing right now works. What's wrong with the way I do things? Are you telling me that there's something wrong with me? And it goes back down to that shame level of building trust. It doesn't require you to point a finger at somebody and say you're not doing it right. It starts with partnerships and alliances and camaraderie and a sense of community to go take it all the way back.
Yeah.
That's what we need to do. And cybersecurity is not exactly a welcoming community, let alone are we good with each other at times. And it's really hard because we have to start focusing on empathy and mitigating shame to get to the risks. And it's so hard in this space because, again, I think this is part of the reason why food and ag has been left to the side is because you actually have to deal with the human factor differently. And you can't just bulldoze your way in.
Well, and I think the other thing that also dawned on me as I was researching this back at the genesis of BlastWave was that the people that are in the cybersecurity industry is some of the highest density of computer science geeks, who, by the way, I love. I get along with. I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons with these guys.
Hey, Dungeons and Dragons is where it's at. You learn community building right then. I played it for years too.
Right. The computer science. So you have this these like computer science folks who, again, high incidence of being more socially awkward, less empathetic, more like Spock, less like Kirk. And so I think that also felt like that's another reason why there is some gaps in the way things are done, because are you empathizing with the farmer? Are you empathizing with the shipping person? Are you empathizing with the person running the grain elevator? Where are you empathizing, or are you just looking at your bits and bytes, or bytes and bytes in this case? You're just looking at source and destination IP addresses and firewalls and routers.
Yep. It talks about, we in OT, we can't stay siloed. We have to go across the whole system. I say this all the time. Happy to be a disruptor. Like, I'm 100% don't do silos very well. I want to run across the whole thing. I want to understand everything. I want to be curious. Yep. I am curious. It's the systems thinking approach, Tom, which you also have. We understand that if you mess up something here, across the pond is going to have a problem as well, if you will. Or, it's all one big system. If you have an issue with access control at the front of your factory, you're going to have a problem at the other end when things are leaving. I think people need to start seeing, instead of just sitting in their role as a food safety person or as a farmer, you have to start seeing the larger picture, your distribution, your transportation, logistic. How do you interact with the people around you? Are you interacting with them because it's been part of your generational situation for a long time? Or have you vetted these people? What's that vet process feel for you? What does that look like for you? I think we have so many aspects to deal with. And then you have people that are like, I could make your tractor autonomous. And the security community goes, don't do that. Or if you do that, you need to do 15 other things to, help.
Right.
And I love helping people, but I don't want to create a position where the help hurts, right? We don't want to do that. And I think both of us as CEOs in our own companies understand that. We don't want to create things that make it worse. We want to create things that keep it simple and keep it moving, right, in the positive direction to keep away from these attacks and also be resilient if you go through it. The idea is to keep people safe and still keep your company together if something does happen.
One thing that I'm going to digress a little bit, but I think it's in the same spirit and theme of what you're talking about here. And it's kind of looking at like the last several hundreds of years and looking at some of the patterns that have developed over this time. And what's interesting is that a lot of these technological breakthroughs have happened in various points where we had indoor plumbing, for example, or we had, instead of individual wells, we had public water. Instead of individual generators with water wheels, we had the electric grid. Instead of having horses, we created this interstate highway system. The same thing with logistics and shipping with barges and moving to containers, computers from mainframe to PC to network PC to cloud. So you've had these kind of changes and breakthroughs, and recently it's AI. But the question is, in order to benefit from that technological breakthrough, it has to be safe.
Yes.
You can't have drinking water unless it's safe drinking water. You can't have electricity going into your house unless it's safe and your house isn't going to burn down. AI safety, we don't even know how to do that today.
No, we're figuring it out as we go. Again, we're building the train.
We're connecting the farms, we're connecting all this infrastructure in the food and beverage industry. And so BlastWave is trying to make that connectivity safe and do it in a very light touch overlay manner. So it allows the people to focus on their business, not having to learn all this other mumbo jumbo, cybersecurity.
Yeah, I don't think that you need to be a user and understand all the terminology. I don't think you do. I do think if you're going to be in an industry that's surrounded around it, so if you're food safety or food defense, you should understand cybersecurity technology and you should understand how it's going to interact with your world. I think if you interact with it in a holistic way, I think you should understand it. I also think that security awareness in general is a super underserved market. We really need to get better at it. We need to make it more digestible, to use a pun.
Yeah.
And I think that's hard because this is why I think role sector-based trainings are super important. It's not going to resonate with you if you take a training for a security engineer and you are an operator on a production line. That's not going to resonate. That means nothing.
Kristin, I don't want them to have to go to a single minute of training. I want to make the cybersecurity controls and I want to make the functionality safe so they don't need to worry about it. We solve that in the back end. We make the easiest way the safest way.
That is that's a huge undertaking, right? Especially since there's so many factors that can interact with that.
Well, this is actually one of the interesting things about the security industry in general is that you want to keep on adding layers and layers and layers of things that increase complexity. And Steve Jobs would always say, that making things simple, reducing complexity to something simple is very, very hard, because you have to understand exactly what the essence of what you're trying to accomplish. And it requires a lot more work than just throwing another log on the fire.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want to have like a 25 layer cake. That's really complicated to go after and eat, right? If you want to take it to food level. And also, no, ew, like that's a lot of cake. And I'm not into that anymore in my life after working in a bakery company. But you're right. You have to be, a master of the craft. I think a lot of us in OT are, a jack of all trades, a master of none, if you will, because we have to understand so many different types of systems and processes that run. And I think it's important to have those people. I also think it's important to have people that specialize in, but you don't have to be that if you're going to run a security program necessarily, like you said. So making it simple, is key. And that's something I feel like we're always striving for anyways. People that are trying to explain in a systems thinking capacity, how can I make this as simple as possible for someone to understand and be able to execute it and feel comfortable and build that trust and mitigate shame and risk and make sure everything's okay and everybody goes home. It's super daunting. It's such a large thing. It's that big ball of string and there's a cat certainly knocking it around. And I think we have such a big world to go after and there's so many aspects. The critical infrastructure side of the house, we have so much going on at all times, whether it's adversaries or ourselves or, there's other things coming in, regulations, governments are changing, new regulations coming from different places in the world. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's just about keeping people safe, like you said. But I love that you're trying to make it easy.
I was going to tell you another story related to one of our customers who is the largest refrigerated and frozen food storage company in the world. So this company is massive. They have 300 football field size warehouses. Think of their refrigerators or freezers. In the US alone, 35 to 40% of the US food supply goes through their warehouses. And so one of the things that, talking about regulations, the FDA requires that these refrigerators and freezers don't get too warm so the food doesn't spoil, which means they need to have connectivity to logs that show the temperature profile of each one of these. And so we helped this company deliver security to those refrigerators and freezers. And we did that in a way that allowed them to remotely manage it and also connect it to the cloud data services that they wanted. It was a really great project and they were just thrilled. They ended up, again, kind of starting out with a very small installation, and now they're 100 times the size they were customer of us two years ago.
That's really intense. I was talking to someone recently who was telling me about how cold storage trucks in transit can be hacked and how it is actually pretty easy. But you'd have to obviously get a vehicle next to it. You'd have to have a driver and the hacker would have to get into it remotely. It's a lot of things.
Well, so
it's easy, but it's very Fast and Furious vibes.
It's very Fast and Furious, but I'll tell you, the reason that they came to us is the reason that a lot of customers come to us is that they were hacked.
Yeah, of course.
And it was a very innocuous hack. But what the vice president of research and development realized is there were only 4 steps that would be required to turn these giant freezers and refrigerators into bombs. They use ammonia to do the refrigeration for this, which can be dangerous. Now, it obviously has a pungent odor, so you can detect it, especially if it's mixed with, oils and things like that in the processing. But the point is that they realized that this could be extremely dangerous if a hacker was able to get access to these things. So they put in place a very impressive, I would say, approach to securing these warehouses, not just to meet the FDA requirement on refrigeration, but also safety of all their plant personnel and neighboring communities.
I think that's something that we have to take into account with OT in general is what's the greater consequences beyond the facility, right?
Yep.
That would be quite an environmental disaster ultimately and could affect the drinking water. It could affect air quality. But it's so fascinating that when you start stacking data like that with the environmental or social, even governance data, it starts to give you this really beautiful profile of the facility. And I'm actually almost pitching my own product right now. Sorry, everybody. And it's actually really interesting to look at this data because Tom, you and I are like data nerds. We like to learn,
Yeah.
And the more information I have that I can learn about, the more infectious I get about it. And knowing that we can solve other problems through an OT space is like the coolest thing.
It's a twofer, it's a threefer, it's a fourfer. Yeah.
cyber community, are you ready to level up? Because Wicked 6 is back, and this time it's bigger and bolder. Woo-hoo! March 28th through the 30th, it's a 3-day global virtual hack and chat event where women worldwide come together to play games, compete, learn, and connect. We've got international speakers, technical talks, hands-on workshops, and of course, the cyber games. Think Capture the Flag, Attack and Defend, and high-stake teams tournament, all streamed live over 3 days. Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned pro, there's a challenge for you. Plus, there's also networking, prizes, merch, and so much more. If you've got a great story to share, consider applying to be a speaker or host a workshop. Want to show what a cybersecurity career really looks like? Submit a day in a life video. Want to get involved? We're also looking for volunteers, referees, and challenge developers to help make this event even more amazing. And if you're a company looking to sponsor the future of women in cybersecurity, check out our sponsorship opportunities.
Right, sounds good. Okay.
Head over to wicked6.com to sign up. All the details and links are in the show notes. Let's level up together.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you look at what happened when the ammonium nitrate plant kind of blew up in Lebanon, and that was the largest non-nuclear explosion in history was from ammonium nitrate. And I think it just goes to show you that the impact of, protecting some of these things from a physical sense, human safety and cyber safety all together, that's part of the mandate. And it does have cascading consequences that can be
cyber
devastating.
physical is super important because I think a lot of people forget that you can push a button, but you could also push the button on your couch. And I know that seems rather extreme, but it's so interesting to me. Example, I was in a media factory years back, CDs, DVDs, games for consoles. That's actually a highly chemical-based process.
Yeah.
No idea. I'm just an average person. I wouldn't have known that. And
Look at what's coming in on the trucks. You're going to see pellets.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because when I was there doing a security audit, I have a degree in environmental management. This is no surprise to anybody listening. And I was a complete nerd about it. I went downstairs, I put the hard helmet on, I started asking how they were stripping the copper out of the water. And all these engineers were standing around me like, who is this person? But because I was so excited about it, we were able to find some more points of ingress and egress for the internet that was there that they didn't even know that was put there by regulation from the EPA. All because I was a complete nerd.
Yeah.
And I think following down into the rabbit hole, if you will, I know you say rat holes, but I feel like the vision of that is not as good as a rabbit hole because everybody pictures Alice in Wonderland.
Bunnies are cuter.
Bunnies are cuter. I think when you do that, it just really improves that trust building too, because that facility would contact me and talk to me whenever I wanted to because I build trust. It's essentially, I look at everybody who works in a factory or production environment in general as an aunt or uncle. It's that vibe.
I'm going to interrupt you 1 minute just to tell you, on this trust idea. I feel that this, and I've told my team this is our job. Your job is not to sell. Your job is to build trust and prove to the delight of the customer, the prospect, that we are working for them. They're not buying something from us. We are working for them. And that mentality is something that is essential in our culture to have the right kind of service mindset.
We have to, especially when you're going to be working with food and ag. If you come into it of, I am got the answers, and that's not going to work. They're going to kick you right out, and probably really hard, actually. I don't like that type of mentality anyways. I wouldn't want someone in my house like that. Why would I show up like that? Ew, It's gross. Telemarketers are annoying for a reason, right? Like you don't want them. It's crazy. So as we wrap up here, Tom, I actually have like a really good question. I've got to start asking this more to the guests because I am just curious and I want to know. What piece of advice would you leave the listeners about staying secure in today's world? And this is aside from BlastWave. This is aside from, this is just your life.
I think the simplest thing to say is that passwords are bad. If you don't know this already, you should. But I think that's one thing. In a world in which the marketing can be very confusing, it's really hard to know when a product actually works and when it doesn't work. I think you've got to think, is there a way to demonstrate that I am protected? Is there a way for me to sleep better at night? How do I know that? And by asking a series of questions around what controls do you have, what threats do you face, and can those controls address those threats? You don't have to have a PhD to ask some of those basic kinds of questions. You don't have to be a CISSP trained security person to ask those kind of questions. But I think the other thing, there's a lot of talk around AI that people are scared about, and rightly so. AI is very powerful. My 16-year-old son wanted to get his first service job. He wanted to go work at a restaurant or a grocery store. And we looked at his experience, and I wrote a prompt in ChatGPT. It took us 3 minutes to put together his resume. And I basically said something like, write a resume for a 16-year-old junior at Palo Alto High School. They're looking for their first service industry job. They did gardening for the neighbors, and they're involved in the National Model UN. And it spit out in less than 30 seconds a very professional looking resume. So it's a very powerful tool, and people are aware of that. I think the other thing is that AI does two things really well. AI automates things better, and it personalizes things better. And so if you can eliminate the risks that are being automated or personalized, you're cutting AI off at the knees, the offensive AI off at the knees. Mm-hmm. And we've actually built this, this kind of philosophy, I think, is really important for us as a community to figure out how to better defend against these AI weaponized threat vectors. So
yeah, I think it's an evolving landscape, if you will. And I think it's going to, unfortunately, take a few bad events to happen before we really get a good handle on AI as a whole in terms of the offensive AI and the defensive AI. But I don't think that people should be afraid of it. Change is always hard because people initially are afraid of it. I don't necessarily think they should embrace it, but they should have a healthy curiosity about it.
Yeah.
AI,
just like we did with computers. Just computers were a tool. And at first, maybe you didn't feel you needed one or whatever. But then as you started to learn a little more about how you could use that tool, then it became productive and helpful as opposed to daunting.
Yeah. And I think as long as we do this in our lives anyways, we're constantly mitigating and assessing risks in our lives at all times. If I run really fast down the stairs and I'm holding like things that are too heavy, I'm probably going to fall down the stairs, right? Like those kind of things.
Yeah.
Or I have a healthy distrust of lettuce because of E. coli,
Yeah.
I make better decisions on my food because I have these set of knowledge now with food. And I think that we learn to look both ways before we cross the road, that kind of stuff, right? I think we have to start doing that with AI a little bit. Don't use it as your search engine necessarily. You can ask it questions, but make sure you verify it. Simple enough. I love that you said that marketing is confusing, because I'm so confused by it all the time too. And also there's so much disinformation, misinformation flying all over the place now too, because of the internet, which is like the greatest thing ever and the worst thing ever.
There was a really interesting incident that occurred it was a manufacturing facility in Wisconsin where they had a lot of different production lines, and they got hacked. Like many kind of food and beverage and manufacturing companies get hacked. And the board asked for there to be a cyber assessment performed. They did the cyber assessment, and they came up with a list of findings. And before they could even implement those findings, they got hacked a second time.
That is insult to injury. Damn,
it is.
That sucks.
And so the CISO, who was worried about getting fired, moved very quickly, and the CIO moved extremely quickly, and they deployed a series of solutions to this factory, had 10 different production lines. And believe it or not, 4 months ago, they were hacked a third time after installing this. So this is where this marketing kind of thing gets really confusing, because you have people saying they can do things they can't. The plant was brought down for 2 days. It cost them $5 million. And again, these guys don't have margin to spare here. And 9 of the 10 lines shut down for that 2-day period. And one line kept running. And the line that kept running was protected by BlastWave. And it was one of those examples where you have proof that we stopped an attack where others didn't. And I think that goes a long way to build trust and to show efficacy under fire as opposed to marketing spin. And, I just don't want people to have to go through those things. I mean, the ransom demand was very high. They ended up paying it, by the way. And what they ended up paying was 10 times what the security controls cost.
Yeah, the money flows when something happens, right? We don't want to be proactive, but it's the return on investment. I always say that, it's a return on investment. It's so frustrating.
Right.
And it's almost one of those, you wish you could take all of your knowledge of all the things that happen and around hacking and everything that happens and just somehow give it to the people that need to make the decisions about spending that money.
I want to talk to these food and beverage folks about how to protect them. And I just feel this calling to protect our food supply chain, and anything I can do. We're much more cost effective as a company. But I mean, I'm not even talking about money. I just want to work with these folks to help protect them, because they're exposed in areas and they shouldn't have to learn all this stuff. They should be able to have a trusted partner who can look out for their best interests.
Absolutely. 100% agree. And I hate that most of the time when we interact with companies that they've been hacked or they've had an issue. And that's when they're reaching out. I actually recently had a company reach out because they haven't been hacked and they don't have an issue, but they're worried it's going to happen because it's happening all around them. And proactiveness is like, we should praise that more in the industry. Be proactive. Come talk to us. And I get a lot of times from the food side is cybersecurity and IT are not approachable. You guys are really just not friendly. And I say, well, you're obviously talking to the wrong people. Like, you need to find the friendly. Find your friendly.
Yeah. There's a lot of friendly people.
There's a lot of friendly people, and there's a lot of people that talk your ear off, especially if you work in a food company. Bring them food. Bring them food. And I always say that, nobody's going to not be friendly to you if you drop a cupcake on their desk, You'd have to be a really, borderline evil human if you're not going to smile for something like that on your desk. Yeah. Well, thanks, Tom. This has been a really fun conversation. I'm really glad that we get to reminisce about the things that we love in the industry and what we're trying to do to support it. And you've got great stories. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for the work you're doing, and congratulations on your award-winning podcast now. That's very impressive.
So appreciate that. I'm just trying to get the word out that we are here and that we're trying to be part of the community and build trust rather than just a disgruntled IT or cybersecurity person who is frustrated.
Yep.
Anyways, thanks so much, Tom.
Thank you. Take care.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. For sharing his insights, stories, and his mission to make cybersecurity actually usable. And of course, thank you for listening. If you found this episode valuable, please don't forget to like, comment, and share the show. It helps more people find these important conversations. And as always, stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.